My name is Mike, and I'm a 45-year-old logistics manager living in a quiet suburb just outside of Chicago. My wife Rachel is 43 and works as a marketing executive for a local tech company. We've been married for 20 years and have two teenage children, Sarah, who is 17, and Ben, who is 15. Our home is a two-story, white-painted house with a neatly manicured lawn and a cozy, warm interior that Rachel has meticulously decorated over the years. To the outside world, we appear to be a picture-perfect family, living the American dream in our little slice of suburban paradise. Our neighborhood is the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where barbecues are frequent in the summer, and kids play basketball in the driveways. Our life, while not without its challenges, has always seemed stable and happy. I've worked hard to provide for my family, often putting in long hours and extra shifts to ensure that Rachel and the kids have everything they need. Rachel, with her sharp mind and charming personality, has always been the heart of our social circle, organizing events and making sure we stayed connected with our friends and neighbors. But recently, a sense of unease has crept into my life, an inexplicable feeling that something isn't quite right. It's as if a shadow has fallen over our household, and I can't shake the feeling that the foundation of our seemingly perfect life is beginning to crack. Rachel has become distant, and there's a coldness in her eyes that I've never seen before. I've tried to ignore it, to tell myself that it's just stress from work or the pressures of raising teenagers. But the nagging doubts persist, growing louder with each passing day. This is the story of how my world was turned upside down, of the betrayal that shattered my trust and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife and our life together. It's a tale of discovery, confrontation, and ultimately revenge. And it all began with a series of seemingly small and insignificant changes that hinted at a truth far darker and more devastating than I could have ever imagined. The first signs of trouble were subtle, almost easy to dismiss as ordinary life changes. Rachel started working late more often, citing big projects and tight deadlines. She began spending more time on her appearance, something I initially appreciated. But as the weeks turned into months, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She was glued to her phone, always keeping it face down or tucked away in her purse, and she'd receive messages at odd hours, often leaving the room to respond. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I noticed Rachel was unusually quiet. She stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables with a furrowed brow, her mind seemingly miles away. When I asked her about her day, she gave me a clipped, distracted response. I shrugged it off, attributing it to stress. But then she started to miss family dinners, something she used to treasure. "Sorry, Mike. There's a meeting I can't miss," she'd say, her tone flat and unconvincing. The distance between us grew. Our conversations became mechanical, devoid of the warmth and connection we once shared. I tried to bridge the gap, suggesting date nights and weekend getaways, but she always had an excuse. The spark that once defined our relationship seemed to have vanished, replaced by a cold, impenetrable wall. It wasn't just her behavior at home that raised red flags. Our friends began to notice the change in her too. At neighborhood gatherings, she was either overly cheerful or conspicuously absent. My best friend Tom pulled me aside one evening after Rachel had left a barbecue early, claiming she had a headache. "Mike, is everything okay with you and Rachel?" Tom asked, concern etched on his face. "Why do you ask?" I replied, trying to mask my own growing unease. "She's different, distant. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but something feels off," he said, glancing towards the gate where Rachel had exited moments before. "I've noticed it too," I admitted. "She says it's work, but I'm not so sure anymore." Tom nodded, his expression sympathetic but helpless. "Just keep an eye on things, Mike. Sometimes people change, and it's not always for the better." His words lingered long after the party ended, a gnawing doubt that refused to be silenced. I started paying closer attention to Rachel's actions, looking for any clue that might explain her behavior. The answers, when they began to surface, were far more troubling than I had anticipated. One Friday evening, as I was tidying up the living room, I found an unfamiliar receipt tucked under the couch cushions. It was from a high-end restaurant in the city, dated a week ago, a night she had claimed to be working late. My heart raced as I stared at the piece of paper, a tangible proof that something wasn't right. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to check our bank statements. I noticed several unexplained charges, Dinners at fancy restaurants, expensive gifts, and hotel stays that didn't match any trips we'd taken together. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, confirming my worst fears. Rachel was hiding something, and it wasn't just work-related stress. The final straw came one night when Rachel was out, supposedly at a business meeting. I heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter and saw a message flash on the screen. It was from a contact saved as Alicia's mom, but the message was anything but parental. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you so much." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a message from a concerned parent. It was from a lover. All the pieces fell into place, each suspicion and clue forming a clear picture of betrayal. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the unexplained expenses, they all pointed to one undeniable truth. Rachel was having an affair. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, the weight of the revelation crushing me. The woman I had loved and trusted for 2 decades was living a double life. The betrayal cut deep, but it also ignited a burning anger within me. I needed to know the full extent of her deceit, and I needed to confront her with the evidence to force her to face the consequences of her actions. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a plan began to form in my mind. I wouldn't let Rachel's betrayal destroy me. I would gather every piece of evidence, confront her with the undeniable truth, and then I would make her pay for the pain she had caused. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The following days were agonizing as I struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy, while my mind raced with plans to uncover the full extent of Rachel's betrayal. I became hyper-aware of her comings and goings, noting every detail and inconsistency. I began to dread her late-night meetings and the excuses that came with them. One night, as Rachel was preparing to leave for yet another meeting, I decided to follow her. My heart pounded in my chest as I tailed her car through the city streets, careful to keep a safe distance. She finally pulled into the parking lot of a luxury hotel. My worst fears were confirmed when I saw her meet a tall, well-dressed man at the entrance. They kissed briefly before disappearing inside. I felt a surge of anger and adrenaline. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked back to the hotel, determined to confront them. I didn't have a plan beyond catching them in the act, but the thought of their betrayal fueled my every step. I entered the lobby and took the elevator to the floor where I had seen them disappear. My hands were shaking as I walked down the corridor, stopping outside the door that was slightly ajar. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside. The sight before me was like a scene from a nightmare. Rachel and her lover were in the throes of passion, oblivious to the world around them. My vision blurred with rage, and I felt a primal scream rising in my throat. Without thinking, I burst into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" I bellowed, my voice echoing off the walls. Rachel gasped and scrambled to cover herself, while her lover froze, his eyes wide with shock. "Mike, what are you doing here?" Rachel stammered, her face pale. "What am I doing here?" I shouted. "What the hell are you doing here, Rachel? Who the fuck is this?" Her lover tried to interject. "Listen, man, I think we should calm down and—" "Shut up!" I roared, lunging at him. I grabbed him by the collar and threw him against the wall. He tried to fight back, but my fury gave me the strength of 10 men. I landed a punch squarely on his jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. "Mike, stop it, please!" Rachel screamed, but her pleas only fueled my rage. I kicked her lover in the ribs, eliciting a pained groan. Blood poured from his nose and his eyes were filled with fear. "How could you do this to me, Rachel?" I shouted, tears of anger streaming down my face. "How could you betray me like this?" Rachel was sobbing, clutching the bedsheets to her chest. "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I spat. "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Your choice." I turned back to her lover, who was now cowering on the floor. "Get the hell out of here before I kill you," I snarled. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his clothes and stumbling out of the room without a backward glance. I stood there, panting, my fists clenched and my heart pounding. Rachel was still crying, muttering apologies that meant nothing to me. The room was filled with the aftermath of their betrayal, and I felt sick to my core. "Get dressed," I said coldly. "We're leaving." Rachel nodded, too terrified to argue. She quickly pulled on her clothes, her hands shaking. I watched her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had we come to this? How had the woman I loved turned into this deceitful stranger? The drive home was silent. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her face a mask of guilt and shame. I could barely keep my eyes on the road, my mind replaying the scene over and over. When we finally arrived home, I parked the car and turned to her. "We're done, Rachel. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to get full custody of the kids. You can't lie or manipulate your way out of this." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Mike, please. We can work this out. I'll do anything." But her words fell on deaf ears. The trust was shattered, and there was no way to piece it back together. I got out of the car, leaving her sobbing in the passenger seat, and walked into the house. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on me, but beneath the pain was a growing sense of determination. This was the beginning of the end, but it was also the start of something new. I wouldn't let her deceit destroy me. I would fight for my children and for my own future, no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hushed voices. Rachel was in the kitchen talking on the phone, her tone anxious and pleading. I got out of bed, my body still aching from the tension and rage of the previous night. As I walked down the stairs, her voice grew clearer. "Please, just stay away," she was saying. "He's furious. It's over. We can't see each other anymore." I entered the kitchen and she abruptly ended the call, her face turning ashen as she saw me. I didn't say anything at first, just poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Rachel stood there, wringing her hands, her eyes darting around the room, unable to meet my gaze. "We need to talk," I finally said, my voice cold and detached. Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. It was a mistake. A horrible mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, setting my coffee cup down with a clatter. "You think what you did was just a mistake? You lied to me. You betrayed our family. How could you?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't find it in me to feel any sympathy. "I was lonely," she whispered. "You were always at work, always busy. I felt neglected, invisible." "So you decided to fuck someone else," I snapped. "That's your solution? To destroy our marriage?" Rachel flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I needed to hear her say it, to admit the full extent of her betrayal. "How long, Rachel? How long have you been seeing him?" She wiped her tears with trembling hands. "About 6 months," she admitted. "It started as just talking, but then it became more." 6 months, I echoed, feeling a fresh wave of anger. 6 months of lies. Who is he? How did you even meet him? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "His name is Chris. We met at a conference last year. It started as a friendship, but then you decided to take it further," I finished for her. "And you didn't think about how this would affect me? Or the kids?" "I did think about it," she said, her voice breaking. "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I was in too deep." "In too deep," I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Do you even love me, Rachel? Or has that all been a lie too?" "I do love you, Mike," she said, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. "I never stopped loving you. I got lost. I made a terrible mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected, stepping back to maintain the distance between us. "A deliberate choice to betray me. And now you have to face the consequences." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll do anything to make it right." "You can start by telling the kids," I said, my voice firm. "They deserve to know why their parents are splitting up." Rachel's eyes widened in horror. "No, Mike, please. Don't drag them into this. Let's figure this out between us." "No, Rachel," I said, shaking my head. "They need to know the truth. I won't let you hide behind lies anymore." I turned and left the kitchen, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. I needed to think, to plan my next steps. As I walked into the living room, I heard footsteps behind me. Rachel had followed me, her face pale and drawn. "Mike, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's not do this. We can work it out. We can go to counseling, try to fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice cold. "You broke us, Rachel. You destroyed everything we built together. There's no coming back from that." "But the kids," she began, but I cut her off. "The kids will be fine," I said, my voice rising. They're better off knowing the truth than living in a house full of lies. She stared at me, her eyes wide and desperate. I made a mistake, she whispered. Please, give me a chance to make it right. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. You had your chance, Rachel. You chose to throw it away. Now you have to live with the consequences. With that, I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I needed air, space to clear my head. The confrontation had left me drained, but also resolute. I would protect my children, and I would rebuild my life without Rachel. There was no other way forward. The days following our confrontation were a blur of legal meetings, tense exchanges, and silent dinners. The kids sensed the tension and asked questions, but I assured them that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure what okay would look like anymore. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the betrayal over and over, fueling a growing need for retribution. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, an idea began to form. I remembered something Rachel had said during one of our many arguments. You never pay attention to what I do around here. Well, now I was paying attention, and I was going to make sure everyone else did too. Rachel had always been meticulous about her social media presence, curating the perfect image of our happy family. Her Facebook and Instagram accounts were filled with pictures of smiling faces, family vacations, and carefully staged moments of domestic bliss. But I knew better now. I knew the truth behind those pictures, and I was going to expose it. The next morning, after Rachel left for work, I sat down at the computer and logged into her Facebook account. I had guessed her password weeks ago, during one of her suspicious late-night texting sessions. As I scrolled through her messages, I found the conversations with Chris, each one a painful reminder of her betrayal. I copied every incriminating message, every explicit photo, and saved them to a folder on the desktop. I created a new Facebook profile under a pseudonym and began posting the screenshots, tagging Rachel, Chris, and several of our mutual friends. I wrote a lengthy post detailing her affair, the lies, and the betrayal, making sure to include enough detail to leave no room for doubt. As I hit post, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. I knew this would destroy her carefully crafted image. But I didn't care. She had destroyed my life, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with messages and calls from friends and family, all expressing their shock and disbelief. Rachel's phone must have been blowing up as well, but I didn't care to find out. I had more important things to do. I called my lawyer, Mr. Davis, and informed him of what I had done. He sighed, clearly disapproving, but agreed to proceed with the divorce papers immediately. When Rachel returned home that evening, she was a wreck. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mike, what did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "I did what needed to be done," I replied coldly. "I told the truth. Now everyone knows who you really are." "You ruined me!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me?" "How could I?" I shot back. "How could you do this to me? To our family? You brought this on yourself, Rachel." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Save it," I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and bitter arguments. Rachel tried to salvage her reputation, but the damage was done. Our friends turned their backs on her, and even her own family was shocked and disappointed. She moved out, unable to face the constant reminders of her betrayal. With Rachel gone, the house felt empty, but it also felt like a fresh start. I focused on my kids, making sure they knew they were loved and supported. Sarah and Ben struggled to understand why their mother had done what she did, but I reassured them that we would get through it together. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I remained steadfast in my determination to get full custody of the kids. Rachel fought back, but her tarnished reputation and the evidence of her affair worked in my favor. The court ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and leaving Rachel with limited visitation rights. In the end, I got what I wanted: justice and a chance to rebuild my life without Rachel's toxic influence. It wasn't easy, and the scars of her betrayal would take time to heal, But I knew I had done the right thing. I had stood up for myself and my children, and I had exposed Rachel for who she truly was. As I looked out at the horizon, the sun setting on another day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead would be challenging, but it was a road I would walk with my head held high, knowing I had the strength to face whatever came my way. The trial was an emotionally draining experience, one that tested my resolve and patience at every turn. Rachel's lawyer tried every trick in the book to paint her as a devoted mother and a wronged wife who had simply made a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The screenshots, the messages, and the photos I'd posted online left little room for doubt about the nature of her betrayal. The courtroom was a cold, sterile environment that did nothing to ease the tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Mr. Davis, my steadfast lawyer. Across the room, Rachel sat with her lawyer, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I couldn't tell if her tears were for the situation she had put herself in, or for the loss of the life she had once cherished. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, called the court to order and began proceedings. Mr. Davis presented our case methodically, laying out the evidence of Rachel's infidelity and her attempts to deceive me and our children. He highlighted the impact her actions had on our family, emphasizing the need for stability and the importance of the children's well-being. Rachel's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that her affair did not diminish her capability as a mother. He painted a picture of a woman who had made a mistake out of loneliness and sought redemption. But the judge was not swayed by emotional appeals. She wanted facts, and the facts were damning. Rachel took the stand, and under cross-examination, she broke down several times, admitting to the affair and acknowledging the harm it had caused. Her lawyer tried to redirect the narrative, focusing on her role as a mother and her contributions to the household, but it was clear that the judge saw through the attempts to deflect responsibility. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke honestly about the impact of Rachel's betrayal on me and our children. I described the sleepless nights, the constant tension, and the emotional toll it had taken on all of us. I emphasized my commitment to providing a stable and loving environment for Sarah and Ben, something that had been shattered by Rachel's actions. The judge listened intently, her expression inscrutable. When the testimonies were over, she called for a brief recess. The room buzzed with whispers as we waited for her return. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. When the judge finally returned, she delivered her verdict. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, it is clear that the actions of Mrs. Henderson have had a significant negative impact on the family unit. It is in the best interest of the children to remain in the custody of Mr. Henderson, who has demonstrated a commitment to their well-being and stability. Therefore, full custody is awarded to Mr. Henderson, with Mrs. Henderson granted supervised visitation rights. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had fought for my children and won. Rachel broke down in tears, her sobs echoing in the courtroom. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the need to protect my children from any further harm. The trial had been a grueling process, but it was finally over. The judge's ruling was a vindication of everything I had fought for. It was a bittersweet victory, one that came with the realization that our family would never be the same. But it was also a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and create a better future for Sarah, Ben, and myself. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the past months lifted slightly. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The truth had come to light, and justice had been served. Now it was time to move forward and focus on healing and rebuilding our lives. The weeks following the trial were a period of adjustment and healing. With Rachel out of the house and the children under my full custody, the atmosphere at home began to change. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of pain and confusion. But slowly, we started to find a new rhythm, a new sense of normalcy. Sarah and Ben were resilient. Despite the turmoil, they adapted to our new reality with remarkable strength. I made it a point to be there for them in every way possible, attending their school events, helping with homework, and making time for family outings. I wanted to show them that even though things had changed, our bond remained unbreakable. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Ben looked up from his plate and asked, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" I smiled, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Yes, Ben, we're going to be okay. We're going to be better than okay. We're a team, and we're going to get through this together. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years. We're strong, Dad. We can handle this. Their words gave me strength. It wasn't just about moving on from the betrayal. It was about building something stronger, something that could withstand whatever challenges came our way. In the months that followed, I focused on self-improvement. I started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional scars left by Rachel's betrayal. Dr. Ellis, a kind and patient man, helped me navigate the complex feelings of anger, hurt, and confusion. He guided me towards understanding that while Rachel's actions had caused immense pain, they didn't define my worth or my future. You are not the sum of her betrayal, Dr. Ellis told me during one session. You are a father, a provider, and a resilient man who is building a new life for himself and his children. Focus on that. I took his advice to heart. I began exercising regularly, something I had neglected for years. Running through the neighborhood, lifting weights in the garage, each activity became a way to channel my energy and rebuild my confidence. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the turbulent years of my marriage. Their support and camaraderie were invaluable, reminding me that I wasn't alone. At work, I threw myself into my job, finding a sense of purpose and fulfillment in my career. My colleagues noticed the change in me, commenting on my renewed focus and drive. It wasn't just about escaping the pain. It was about reclaiming my life and proving to myself that I could rise above the past. Rachel's visits were difficult at first. She was allowed supervised visitation with the kids, and each encounter was a reminder of the life we had lost. But over time, even those interactions began to change. Rachel seemed genuinely remorseful, and while I couldn't forget what she had done, I found a way to be civil for the sake of our children. One afternoon, as she was leaving after a visit with Sarah and Ben, she turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. Mike, I'm truly sorry for everything. I know I can never undo the damage, but I hope one day you can forgive me. I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive you, Rachel, but I appreciate the apology. We both need to focus on the kids now, on giving them the best life possible. She nodded, wiping her tears before getting into her car and driving away. It was a small step towards closure, but it was a step nonetheless. As time passed, I began to feel a sense of peace. I knew there would always be a part of me that carried the scars of Rachel's betrayal. But those scars no longer defined me. I was a father, a friend, and a man with a future full of possibilities. One evening, as the kids and I sat around the living room, playing a board game, I looked at their smiling faces and felt a surge of gratitude. We had been through hell, but we had come out stronger. The love and resilience we shared were unbreakable. Dad, it's your turn, Sarah said, nudging me with a grin. I laughed, moving my piece on the board. All right, I'm going. But just so you know, I'm totally going to win this time. Ben rolled his eyes playfully. Sure you are, Dad. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and love, I realized that the future was bright. We had faced the storm and come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. The road ahead would have its challenges, but we were ready to face them together. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, knowing that we were on a path to a better, happier life.